5 people that I'm going to ask to kind of give just a little introduction. We've talked about this before amongst us. And they're going to kind of give you some initial thoughts on the topic. But before I do it, let me just introduce them all. There's Eric DeVoy, who's from BP. He's a principal security architect with BP. There's Keith Deshari, who's director. Your title is complicated to me. But of technical expertise, automation, control, electrical. That means your technical expertise related to all of those areas, right? I need to rewrite your title for you at BASF. Go ahead. Todd Fox, who's a senior manager of information security services at Dow, and hopefully you can see the pictures, so you can match the pictures because they're not in that order up here. Jarrett Lawrence, who's industrial IT capability technology architect for ExxonMobil, and Kevin Kumpf, who's he works for. I'll be real open here. He works for a supplier company now. He's actually done a lot of consulting over the years, though. He's worked in a lot of different industries, and that's one reason why I invited Kevin to participate in this panel, okay? We normally, if you know ARC, we kind of pride ourselves in having end users talk, but we invited Kevin to participate on this panel. So let me start off by inviting, I'll ask Keith first.
Okay.
Go ahead. Give your little just comments on.
Oh, just comments on the topic. Well, I'm Todd Fox with a stolen identity right here. Now, Keith Deshari with BASF, and when we talk about connected worker, I mean, for me, and don't get me wrong, because as a company, we haven't really categorized this. This is just me and my group, I guess, that kind of categorize it this way. But we have the I needs and the I wants. And in the I needs, I try to define that bucket as being basically the area and that connectivity that we want to do that actually adds value to what BASF is in the business of doing. And so that's the I needs when it comes to connectivity, no matter what level. And specifically, we're talking about to OT. And then there's the I wants. And the I wants, I have 2 buckets that I basically kind of describe for the I wants. And Glenn is going to cringe in the back of the room. I see him over there. But there's two areas of that. There's the TDLs and there's the TDNs that are in that bucket of I want, okay? And I want is not a necessary value add to BASF. I'll give you what the acronyms are, so if you're taking notes. First acronym is too damn lazy. Okay, I just want access because I'm too lazy to go walk over and get the data, okay? And then the other one is too damn nosy, okay? I want to be at home and I want to see what my operators are doing. I'm not adding any value, but I want this access. I want this connectivity. And so the problem we deal with, and Sid's comment earlier kind of relates to something I said on a phone call we all had, is the fact that I want to do what I can for the I needs because it adds value. The I wants, I want to try to figure out something different on, because my fear that I have is more with the magnitude of internal people in the company that have connectivity, remote connectivity to the OT systems than it is in an external company. And the reason I'll tell you that and pass this on afterwards is because most of the time, any type of remote connectivity that my company allows right now is hosted. And what I mean by hosted is it's a approved access that we have a BASF person sitting there saying, hey, supplier A, I want you to come into my system to help me troubleshoot it. So it's basically under control the entire time they're in the system. So I'm a little less fearful of that than I am with the whole situation of just having, I don't know, I guess somewhere around 50,000 workers in the North American area for BASF just having access because basically they're TDL and TDN. So with that, I'll pass it on.
I don't think you can follow that up too much, but I'll try. Jarrett Lawrence, I'm actually in as my title says, I'm in the IT department, so I'm not in the actual ICS or OT, however you want to frame that, but I've been working in this environment for the last 10 plus years for ExxonMobil and 28 years total as far as my career. And I'll say that I like the actual way that it was actually framed on that, because I think a lot of times when we talk about data and how we get data, we kind of get a little too prescriptive on, just giving somebody access to data as opposing to what are they actually trying to do with that data and how we're delivering it. And so I think that's one of the bigger issues that I've worked on in the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years in the company, is just making sure of not over giving data where it's not required, right? And giving folks access to what they truly need to add value to the company. So I'm on board with that. I think that's a great statement. Obviously, we want to be as risk tolerant and as giving of the data that we need to, but we also want to be very thoughtful about how that data is being delivered. So I'm very aware of those same problems, and we're definitely trying to solve those challenges today in ExxonMobil as well. So,
Eric?
Thanks, Eric DeVoy. So at first, just want to say thanks for being here. It's great to be here live again. And I didn't expect to get the helpful things not to do from you during this presentation, but that was kind of useful as well. No, my name is Eric DeVoy. I'm a principal security architect, as Sid mentioned, and my role is focused on protecting all of BP's critical infrastructure, essentially. So myself and my team, we set the security strategy for all BP's critical assets, our industrial control assets, what we call automation systems. Just to be clear, traditionally at BP, those automation systems are things like refineries, pipelines, chemical plants, drilling rigs, things like that. But we are transitioning our company. The company's transitioning from what we call an international oil company to an integrated energy company. And as we do that, we have a lot more renewable assets, hydrogen plants, offshore, onshore wind, solar. My team also has scope of our EV charging infrastructure. So our electrical vehicle charging infrastructure is growing quite rapidly as well. We have an aim to get over 100,000 charge points by the end of the decade across the globe. So that's within scope as well. And my team's mission is really, really simple. It's to securely enable safe, reliable, and intelligent operations. And safety and reliability have been around forever. We added intelligence, though, to our mission because our digital agenda is really key to driving our company forward, driving that transition to the integrated energy company. And the connected worker plays a really big role in our digital agenda. The connected worker value proposition for BP is strong. I mean, we see value in safety improvements, reliability improvements, also availability and reliability across all our critical processes. But achieving that value, it's tough. I think Sid kind of context, described how tough that is. Getting after our mission is really, really tough. I like to think of the challenge as one of security, speed, and scale. So looking at those three things, how do we make sure we get the right security in place to enable our connected worker initiatives, but do it at a pace that's really going to drive the company forward? And how do we do it at the scale that is BP, which is very complex, very complicated. So really, I'm looking forward to the conversation today to really understand how I can learn some things to take back to kind of get after that challenge, that security, speed, and scale challenge that's in front of me at the moment. So, yes.
Now, Todd, I think you gave us a slide. Yeah. I'll let Todd speak. He gave us a slide that he wanted with the points he wanted to make.
Yeah, so is the mic on?
Is the mic on over there?
Okay, great. So good morning. It's really good to be here in person today. As mentioned, I'm Todd Fox representing Dow. At Dow, I own security architecture for IT/OT, threat prevention, threat detection, and our vulnerability management program. I also manage the security team's interaction with their digital manufacturing programs. The ARC white paper Sid and his team wrote on securing the industrial connected worker has direct applicability to what we're doing at Dow. Many of the value cases and challenges outlined in the paper apply to our work environment. The three primary use cases shown in the upper left of the slide here include we need to enable remote experts to assist the plant with troubleshooting. On-site plant resources need to interact with the process from a mobile device. Remote on-call support personnel require the ability to access process data and alerts in a read-only fashion. The value case for introduction of technology to enable visibility of the plant from a mobile device is significant. It reduces operators' needs to go back and forth between the control room and the process area when they need to perform certain activities, like adding raw material to a batch process. This not only results in shortened process execution time, it reduces the probability of human error, but it also provides a better employee experience. It decreases stress, allowing maintenance and operation personnel to understand the status of production and receive alerts and notifications. The consequence of a cyber event in a chemical plant can not only result in the impact to production, but it can result in a safety incident. When enabling access, we need to ensure, when you look at the middle of the slide there, that we secure both the identity, the device, the data, and the network to prevent an insider or external actor from impacting operations. To help empower our plant staff, we've made a few key investments to lay the foundation of our manufacturing digital program. These capabilities include re-architecting the enterprise network to move to SD-WAN, moving our security services edge from an on-premise deployment to a SaaS-based offering, implementing private LTE in several of our sites, starting first with our facilities in the state of Texas, delivering container-based mobile applications that provide connected workspaces to access enterprise resources such as drawings, logbooks, digital procedures, task lists, and to check on work orders. Finally, we've implemented data hubs to assemble information to facilitate reporting so that direct access to our distributed control systems isn't required to obtain insights. To address the risks associated with mobile operations and remote assistance, we've implemented several processes and technology solutions shown on the far right. I won't go through each of those, but let me just touch on a few of them. From a process side, we've got strong change management. When you make a change at Dow, you have to have visibility of the process, and you're required to execute our management change process. In addition, when we look at mobile devices, we ensure the controls that we place on those devices mirror what we've done on the wired network. We ensure that when you look at a wireless network, that all of the devices are registered and well managed. We've implemented endpoint management and security threat prevention software. We're presently piloting the implementation of mobility solutions offered by our key control vendors to obtain read access to plant data and notifications. When you look at, threat actors for ransomware, one of the key controls there is being able to do backup and restoration. Having an immutable backup that an adversary cannot encrypt, making it unavailable in time of recovery is key. And then most importantly, and I think Sid and team touched on this, is, knowing that a motivated adversary may find a way in to compromise controls, we need to ensure that we obtain visibility with cyber threat analytics to detect abnormal behavior. Although this is the path we're taking at Dow, these controls can be incorporated in many of the companies represented here today. Our next opportunity at Dow is to take a closer look at scaling a mobile operator solution that allows a single device to have access securely to both enterprise and plant resources to facilitate the actions required to operate a plant from a mobile device within battery limits. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd. Okay, Kevin, Oh, let me move. I'm sorry, you got a slide. Hopefully it's in here. Yep, it is.
Good morning, all. My name is Kevin Kumpf, and while I'm here from Ciolo, I'm not here from Ciolo. I'm here for all of you. I've been in your shoes. I've been in this positions you've all had. For several years, I was the director of OT security for Iberdrola, which is one of the Avangrid companies. I've also been the director of cybersecurity response for HSBC Bank. I've worked for many of the vendors in this space. I've worked for a lot of supply chain companies out there, factories, mobile workforces. And I've also been involved in many of the left of boom, preventing threats for companies such as Cybereason, and then right of boom, as in bank bombings in Turkey, 9/11, pipeline attacks, medical center, medical device attacks. So my goal is to represent what you do from your side, having been on both sides, and work with vendors like Ciolo to help you get technologies and problems solved. For me, it comes down to three things. It's PPT, and it's not a PowerPoint slide ending, it's people, process, technology. And Todd sort of started saying he has a process and a vision of how they do things. One of the goals that we have when we look at the landscape of OT, and OT is one of those alphabet soup terms. What is OT these days? You have IoT, IIoT, medical IoT. I call them Internet of Things, as people do, but the reality is it's Internet of Threats. You have these devices that are truly trying to threaten you. That's the technology part. The people are enabling those technologies to become that threat. The process is what you can control, and generally business process and business use cases stay foundationally the same. So everybody is talking today about going to the cloud. Do you know how many people I talk to that say, I don't want to go to the cloud, but they're driving me there? Why is that? It's your business. So if we look at the use cases out there, you have the term secure remote access. What does that really define? Is it an internal worker from the carpeted floor getting into the industrial floor? Is it a mobile worker, as Todd and others have said here, that's out in the field that needs to get a farm implement in the area that they cannot have access, or they have low bandwidth access to fix that? Or is it somebody on your shop floor that you want to keep arm's length away, as Sid said, reverse proxy from that platform, because safety is key. If you look at the IT world, we've talked about the availability. That is key in our world, but safety comes on top of that. Safety is the point that says that if something makes a mistake, any machine, any person, any process, you have an issue. So our business use cases are really secure remote access, is what you're saying, is get the people in. Monitoring, ushering, watching them when they're in your environment. And then the big one that everybody says to me is we have to prevent ransomware. How many people know exactly what ransomware is? If you look at the industry definition, it's basically taking for financial gain or holding hostage. In the OT world, are they really going to do that to you? Are they going to do that, or are they going to take systems down? I've worked with customers that they've had systems taken down just for the fun of it. I worked for a packing plant where somebody sent them an email and said, I got into your process and I changed the batch temperature of what you're producing, which now is basically great. They weren't holding them hostage. They now had to go out and destroy all the product that they put out, do a product recall. Vendors had vehicles lined up with things to come into the plant to be processed in a just-in-time process. They had to shut down the plant, clean it, sterilize it. So that was the threat. It wasn't about him making financial. It was about taking that company and having them lose financially in other ways and other third-party supporters. And then you have the Industry 4.0 remote monitoring and 5G. I've worked with many companies that say, I want my factory to have real-time data coming off the floor. How many networks out there are prepared for that saturation of bandwidth? They've toppled systems because they said the vendors want the data. How's that data going to improve the factory if you're toppling your networks? So that's a concern. The other one is the shop floor to the carpeted floor. People call it an integration. An integration is a blending of two things together. Interfacing is where you connect two systems, but you have that disconnect point so that both can function separately. Are we really doing integrations out there like everybody says, or are we doing an interfacing in the environment? And then the last two are basically regulatory and insurance. Now it's interesting because when Sid mentioned ZTNA, Zero Trust, many people don't even know that's just a NIST, quote unquote, theoretical standard. It's not hard and fast these days. It gives you subject areas. But if you say it's 800-207, people are like, what are you talking about? But there are things coming out, new directives, that are saying that you must do multi-factor authentication, which is a component of ZTNA, for non-service accounts and OT. How do we do that? There are ways to do that. And then the augmented worker. We're talking connected workers here, but the augmented workers are the smart workers, the intelligent badges, the 3D visors and things like that people are looking at, the virtual reality. People say that's the next step. Those are connected devices connected to a worker, connected to your people process part of the technology. How do you understand that? And the use cases we're getting to, worker shortages, as I call them, the new kids on the block. If you look around the room here, I'm nice to see a lot of younger faces, but OT is the older industry where people say, I want to be in the cloud. I don't want to be OT on the shop floor. That's boring. Put me in the cloud. Have fun. So how are we trusting those people? The next one is remote access to anyone, anywhere. We've talked about these locations. How do you get to some of your places that are remote, low bandwidth? You know, we've talked about that picture Sid put up. We're talking about the shop floor right now, but how do you go with one technology solution that's today and tomorrow? Because our industry doesn't change quick. And then we get into ransomware, the big threat that everybody's afraid of that truly I ask customers and they can't define for me. It's a wonderful thing to be afraid of something that you can't define. How about we define what it is and why you're afraid of it and help you all out? And then what I call the bring your own disaster. Whether it's people bringing it right now, as in your third-party vendors, or somebody walking in your shop floor, or somebody at home that says, I just have to get somewhere and do something. Everybody talks posturing and other things, but the reality of it is do you know what they're doing? That's a problem waiting to happen. And I've been there, and I'm sure many of you have as well. And then, as I said, the Internet of Threats, the cloud, do you really want to go there? And then finally, the drivers of regulatory. A lot of insurance people saying, we want multi-factor authentication. It's a checkbox. I'll just end with this. You cannot get proper security by just doing compliance. But if you do proper security, no matter what framework you're looking at, you can get compliance from that. So if you do the security, you get compliance. If you do the compliance, you get the checkbox. And I think that's really what we have to look at now as a connected worker, because you are in that realm of what are we going to do, compliance or security? And hopefully we can talk about that today.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. All right, what we want to do from here on, I want to open up the floor to any questions anybody has, any of the panelists, but what we've done to kind of drive the discussion, I'd done a survey last year about connected workers. I'll be honest, we didn't get as many responses as I'd hoped. I mean, like I said, I'm all excited about this topic, but maybe I'm too precise on certain things. But I have some results that we got that I shared with the panel, and I just want to throw those up. And there's a few questions and just see what the results are and whether that aligns with what they see, what they do, and why not, and things like that, okay? And then, but anytime you want to raise a question, please raise your hand, because I mean, my first thing is to make sure you get your questions answered, not me getting my questions answered. So I'm obviously worried about that too. But so let me start with the first question. This was a question we asked, and it was just really saying, what kind of scenario? Now, this was specifically focused on OT or ICS. And, it was saying, what kind of connected workers, connections do you allow into your OT systems? Okay, pretty basic question, I think. And if you look, the thing that I found interesting was 50% said, oh, well, we allow local service providers. Now, local terminology here, local means they're in the facility, okay? The remote means they're outside the facility. But they allow local service providers to come in and connect their own devices to OT networks, okay? Now, I don't know that you guys do that. I think most of you probably do. I wanted to get your feedback, but some of my questions about it is when you do that, I mean, you mentioned about hosted workers, but still they're connecting a device. What do you do about again, I'll mention this. I frame my thinking anymore around zero trust, even though I know that's not a reality or anything, but those issues. How do you ensure that you can trust that person? There's probably issues around that. There's also issues. They're connecting a device. You don't know where that device was before. Do you know what I And what else might be on it? You know, they may have just been playing, I'll say playing games or something with it, who knows what. So what do you do about protecting from all those perspectives? So does anybody want to start?
I mean,
Go ahead, you're
yeah,
first. You're the unlucky one sitting next to me here.
I mean, I'll start with this. I think, you know, when we do allow the remote connectivity, it's on a company device. And then, of course, they're allowed to VPN in, and then with the right credentials, they can get to an OT sector.
It's a company managed device.
It's a company managed device. And so we currently do not have a provision to where we allow for bring your own device and be able to connect through that. And hopefully we'll never get there, right, Rob? But you know, in essence, and I'll kind of bring up what Clint said earlier. Even with this, okay, I call this portion of my discussion the Starbucks syndrome. Is I fear the capability, especially with how smart the adversaries have become to disguise their capabilities, especially in the last few advisories that we've gotten. Somebody sitting at a Starbucks accessing, you know, BASF OT using VPN over the highly secure Starbucks Wi-Fi. It's tested and proven by a barista. But it's that ability for just somebody to get in to that single laptop and put something just like what we've seen in the most recent malware. To have a malicious piece of software that identifies itself as something that is readily available, is a COSIS file that's readily available to any type of PLC. That's the fear factor that comes out with all BASF employees having that type of remote access to an OT system. I mean, they don't have to link in through that computer sitting at Starbucks and then drive their way in there. They can drop that one single file that we're seeing from the adversaries right now, and that thing can propagate because it can live in the IT environment until it gains a connection to get it to the OT environment. And that's the, you know, that's the real part of, I guess, what Rob and the automation security group in my organization is dealing with on a daily basis right now is that threat.
So Eric wanted to say something, I could tell, but before you do, I just want to clarify one thing.
Yeah.
You're allowing people to not just look at data, but also modify it. These are people that are, for some reason, you're trusting them to do something, and it's a corporate device, so you're trusting the device, except you're really not, from what you just said. But
Yeah. So I was going to clarify that. You said I trust. No. Yeah.
okay.
So it is. I mean, essentially, by the company's standards, they have a trusted device that they're allowing people to have trusted access. My hope, you know, my own hope would be that it would be read-only access, but you know, that's not the case.
Okay.
And so it's.
Okay. Eric?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Keith is saying, but kind of want to play devil's advocate a little bit. You know, this TDN acronym I really like, but if there's a lot of people that are TDN, I think there might be some value behind that, right? And, you know, a big part of my job is not to just be a stop sign. You can't do this, you can't do that. It's really to try to understand where that value is and providing transparency into processes, you know, wherever people are, transparency into data, there's value there, right? And I don't think we're just in this just for security, right? Otherwise, we just shut down business. So I want to be an enabler. And I agree with what you said, though. We don't want just any device VPNing in and connecting in, but there's other ways to do things. And we start to break down kind of remote access into a couple, you know, just kind of distill it down a bit. You know, we see remote monitoring, remote maintenance, remote engineering, and remote operations. And to me, those are different things, right? If I just want to monitor a process, I just need to get data out. If I need to come in to provide some maintenance to a system. But once I'm start coming in to do some actual engineering work from the remote side or operating things from the remote side, well, that's a different story. We have to look and make sure we have the right security controls for what that process is. But I guess one thing I would say is whenever I hear a lot of noise where people want something, it's usually not just because they're nosy. It's because there is some sort of value behind that. And a big part of my job is to make sure we can unlock that value.
And I guess back to that, I would say, I mean, I agree with what you're saying, but there are ways around direct access to an OT system, down to an ICS system, that I can get data to people. We use a layered, most companies use a layered approach for protection. That data transfer is one thing. I can get that data transfer above my L2 and L1 levels and allow as much, you can go look at that all you want. You can study that data, you can make decisions off of that data. And there's no reason for that person who can add that value to go down to L2 and L1 to do anything. And I think that's the break point.
Yeah.
Because people want to get down to that L2, L1, but what is the reason? Why do you want to get there?
Yeah, and 100% agree. I mean, we have a principle of bringing the data, the applications to the people versus the people coming into the
Yes.
environment. So yeah, 100% aligned with that.
Yeah, I
But
think
don't-
you have, oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead,
Steve.
Jared.
I was just gonna say, I think you have to break apart, is interaction in the data required, or is it just view of the data, right? I think you have to break that apart. It's not a all in one or none. You can break that apart, right? And so I think you gotta identify the persona and the actual practitioner of what they're doing and what they're trying to get. So I think that drives you to your decision point and your acceptance of risk of what you're gonna do.
Okay, I know, I think Kevin, you want to say, but let me just, because my memory's not good, it's going to go.
It's Keith. Just help them with your
Thank
memory.
you. No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah, everybody hold up their badges, so I remember. The one thing I wonder, because I'm not actively doing the kind of stuff you guys do, but it's one thing to say, okay, you need data, fine. This is the connected kind of engineered solution that I was referring to. So the next question you would ask somebody is, well, what data do you need to see? So then they tell you, this is the data I need to see. You say, fine, I'm going to find a way to get that up to you. I'm going to map it up, however, a lot of people take it to the cloud. And then the next day somebody says, well, I need to see that too, or I need to see that too. I need to see that too. At some point, I would think that would drive me crazy personally. And so I would end up saying, this is my thinking. Of course, I don't have to do it either. But, well, wait a minute. Let me allow you to go down and pick up whatever you want. I don't know what you want, and I don't think anybody can define in today's world. I mean, one thing is for somebody who's just monitoring OEE kind of, that kind of stuff, that traditional kind of stuff. Another thing is when you're asking someone to do something, to service it, and he says, well, wait a minute, this looks funny. Let me look at this. Oh, I can't see that because you didn't map it up. So at some point, I think that's one reason I think that connected thing falls apart, because it's a different use case in my mind, even though we're saying it's a use case, somebody wants to see something. But there's also that other use case in there where you don't know what you want to see, and it's a level of the depth of what they're doing. Like even somebody troubleshooting, you might say, I'm only going to let you see it, but you don't know what he needs to see to troubleshoot until he sees what the problem, he sees something funny and he says, well, what about this? Well, you didn't bring it up. So how do you deal with that in that scenario? So, I mean, that's one reason I think it's not an engineered issue. It's a difference.
It is. When I built an outage management, energy management system so that people out in the real world could report a power outage and the people in the control center could look and say what's going on, I mapped out 15 fields that they'd need across. By the time we got done, it was the entire database because contextually they could not figure out how they were going to use that data. They couldn't figure out the process part to enable the technology of what the people needed to do. And that was really eye-opening because they also engineered the network to be a 10 gig network. And I said, well, this is a Unix application. What bandwidth does the application take? Oh, don't worry about that. Did you realize by the time they were done, they had this giant 10 gig network and they could only do 500 megabytes based on the application size and performance? It was great. We built the Indy 500 Speedway for somebody out there in their Yugo. I thought it was just a fabulous usage of dollars. To the point of the devices, I've worked for so many different consultants and vendors. Do you know how many laptops that I've had to ship back to them that they didn't know I had because they didn't have asset tracking. And how many customers had told me that they had microsegmentation, and I was able, through what I call a virtually provided nightmare, to get right down to their shop floor and let them know that one of their controller components was not functioning properly. And they said, how do you know that? I've said, well, I'm sitting in my living room through the IT VPN into the environment, just looking at some statistics on the wire, and this is going on. And they said, we'll get back to you. But we'll get back to you as a, we don't have a clue, we can't validate yes or no, we'll just end this conversation. So the zero, the trust part, as you said over here, where does the trust begin? And how do you define it as a business?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm looking at them. If somebody has a question, please. Yeah, please, I'll dominate. I'm full of questions.
I can tell you, we could go for a while here.
I know it's an interesting discussion.
So we know who you are.
Oh, Rob Price,
Yeah,
BASF.
you got
How are
Rob
you
as your
today?
straight man. Here, go ahead.
So we're spending a lot of time talking about devices and you know, ransomware and attacks from the outside and all the other stuff. But anybody external to your control room is an external worker. If they're not sitting in the control room, how does operations know what's going on? The biggest takeaway from the Oldsmar water hack to me was when an operator, seeing someone moving the mouse on the screen on a control station, thought nothing of it, because people get in the system all the time. And I'd like to know from the owner-operators on the panel, how is it that you make sure that operations knows who's in the system externally and why, so that they know to react to something?
We'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, but you know.
Everybody understands he works with him.
I could start on that one if that's right. I mean, this comes back to saying about, you know, what is the function? What are they trying to do? So if you're trying to do remote operations, so you actually have access to an HMI to do operations, we have different capabilities for that. So, you know, secure remote access, privileged remote access. And so what we have for that solution is the ability for someone to get approval to come in at a certain time that's BP approved. They come in through a proxy that can be monitored by someone that is at the plant. That session can be disconnected, it's recorded. And so we have kind of more advanced kind of capabilities for those types of scenarios. We try to minimize those, but those are the types of things we're more worried about. And so we apply more security, different types of solutions to those scenarios than we would for someone just to come in to upgrade a historian or something like that, right? So yeah, I mean, it's that you definitely have to look at the risk of what the actual process is and then make sure you're applying the right solution, the right service, the right security for that particular thing.
Yeah, the only challenge there is there's a big difference between intent and capability. What they're capable of doing is what you have to protect against, not their intent.
Exactly, and so, you know, I talked about some of the controls of, you know, making sure that's approved. They don't get in until it's approved. Being able to have someone over their shoulder monitoring it, disconnecting their session, but also comes in with a specific identity that is least privileged, right? So they come in specifically for a particular use case, and that is then only allows them that specific capability and nothing else. Yeah.
I want to ask a question to the audience.
Please do.
Yeah. Just by a show of hands, how many people out here have people within the engineering area that are allowed to remote access your OT system, your ICS? And of those, how many of them have read write? Okay, and of those, how many of them are allowed or have that read write access and can do it at any time without their board operator knowing? How many of y'all see that as a problem? That was a scientific poll.
That was. No, that was a good poll.
It's telling, because if you saw Rob over there who works for me, he was raising his hand as well, because that's one of the things we deal with today. And it's, you know, for me, it's a common problem, and it's a problem. I like what you were saying, because it's administered. And right now, I feel like we don't have it administered where I'm at, and it needs to be, because, I mean, how many of y'all would like me to have access to your email without you knowing on your laptop? me. I mean,
That'd be dangerous.
that scares me. It should scare you. That if I have access to your email and I have your CEO's email address in your thing, I mean, no telling what I could do.
You know, it's interesting. I was involved in the Black Energy incident where you're supposed to have OT systems not talking to IT systems. And what caused it was somebody wanted to get somebody an email about an event that was happening that coming weekend. Well, that coming weekend turned into a Black Energy event, so it didn't really matter what was going on because we had something new. But the tough part that was about this, to your point, and to your point, was that I've said to people, when you let people in, is there a change process? ServiceNow, whatever, and they're like, no, that's an IT system. Why would we have that on the OT side? We just have a logbook. And yet I've come in to my data centers where people turned around and it was like, hey, the vendor said he was going to come in tonight. I've got to leave. The other guy was busy. I'm just going to leave open the VPN for him. And I was like, and what business case justification and security risk was that? Convenience. So of those people that raised their hand that said, I want people and then give them access, how many people truly want to give access to their OT systems?
I'm gonna, because what we ended up talking about was my second slide, actually, which is fine. I mean, because that's how everybody thinks of connected work. Again, the first slide was really around connecting a device that you're in the plant, okay, which is an issue. But because I know this is such a big issue, let me just go to that slide, okay? And if you remember, on my original slide in the last one where I showed you the ARC model and I said the line was right here, this is where most people are. And I made a point, I think I made a point, that they had security for remote access, but they didn't really have what's needed. And that's what I'm hearing here. And I think so this happens to be a question about how do you secure your remote access. And there's lots of issues there, and I find people doing things like proxy servers, outbound only connections, well, all of these things on here. Everybody has a DMZ. This is what the survey said on the survey. Everybody seems to have a DMZ, but everybody also uses VPN. And the thing with VPN, yeah, that kind of really protects on the way to the site. But once you get in the site, you got access to everything, which is exactly what you don't want, I think. But there's a lot of other technologies that people could be using. And notice that it's not being used. That's one reason I did that. If you look, it's just they use DMZs, they use VPN. And some of them that says all remote sessions have to go through IT security. Now, one reason I asked that, and I'm not sure it was clear to the people who answered, that's the problem all the time when you do surveys. What does IT defenses mean? I meant that you take advantage of all the kind of security that's in the IT world before they get in. But I'm not sure that's what they took it to mean. But if you look at the other stuff like multi-factor, even multi-factor authentication stuff, but the stuff of when people get in, this thing, you used the word hosting, and I know Dow, at least that's where I learned the word from years ago, was ushered, where you literally, the person has to make the connection. You have to connect with a person in the plant. They have to enable you to get in. They can monitor what you do. There's a record kept of everything that's being done. They can cut you off. And some people, there's technologies out there today, and more in the IT world, where it limits what actions you could take. That go very deep. And some of these solutions that I've seen, they can do checks on the actual commands, like down in Modbus kind of command level and stuff like that, so that they can't even make up certain ones. I mean, that's very hard to engineer those beforehand because you don't know which, again, my argument is you don't know what the case is going to be. But what I'm hearing here, and with your wonderful poll, your scientific poll there, most people don't even do the ushered access, or the controls are very limited. And I guess, and so I'm wondering why people aren't addressing that, because that's something that could be addressed without going, when you do stuff, like I remember talking, it was Eric, actually. I think, no, it was Jared. Eric or Jared on a panel we had on another discussion. I brought up the thing about network access control. And today the IT networks are much more sophisticated, with respect to privileges and stuff like that. And when they say network access control, it's very specific and can do a lot of controls. But you can't even do that in an OT system because a lot of these legacy systems, they weren't built for that. These are the devices I have, they're connected, that's the end of that. There's no reason to have network access control because nobody connects and disconnects, right? It's only when you start adding those features. So I'm just wondering why, so everybody out there, what I heard from your poll was that everybody has the same problem. Nobody's really doing that. And I'm kind of wondering why. Why the ones you can do is what I don't understand.
Well, there's a couple things out here. Number one, I call it the security by obscurity factor. Just get in, get the job done. It needs to be done now because business is going to suffer. The other part is if you ever get into an incident, and everybody out there hopefully has an incident response plan, you're looking to say, what is the spread and the impact? The blast zone, you know, and that's important because if you look, everybody says ACLs or other things, all those do is control the blast radius. Well, we've limited it to this microsegmentation. But if you don't know your assets and you don't know how they talk to each other, how do you know how to secure them? And how do you know how to give access to secure them and at what granular level? So if you don't know your endpoints and you need to get your business done, it's security by obscurity. Just get the vendor and I trust the vendor. He's going to come in and do this. And it's that simple. And so you look at all these things here, and most of these things have been driven by regulatory or people have had an incident or an accident that says, why do you need MFA? Who decided yesterday that MFA was more important than it was 6 months ago or a year ago?
And I you know, we've gone, actually, we had a system that operator had to approve them getting in the system, and we tracked and we had everything. And for some reason or another in our company, we kind of went to a different scenario now where we don't. And I want to get back to that. But I do want to say that from my perspective, because I've been on kind of like stop this connectivity kind of a rant, but I want to kind of clarify because there is a value, and now I'm going to give y'all two buckets. I gave y'all two acronyms earlier. I'm going to give you two buckets. There is the key role of remote access that provides a tremendous amount of value. You know, having a remote expert in, even within the company, okay, there's a lot of value in that. And typically when that goes on, that is something that is, you know, monitored, and the access is monitored, and everybody in the plant knows what's going on, and everybody's alert to it. It's the other bucket that is, look what I can do bucket, that is my concern. Okay, so when it comes to that, I mean, when I say about look what I can do, it's like, you know, somebody goes home and they're sitting there with their kids and they say, look what I can do. I can get to the graphics over there that the operators watch. I'll open this valve. You know, the look what I can do bucket. So that's the concern area. So I don't want to paint a picture from BASF standpoint that we don't see value in it. We see value in remote expert. We see value in that remote access. We just would like to have it, you know, from my group standpoint, which is the automation security group, we just like to see it better controlled, just like you had mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kevin mentioned people process technology. I think you got some Homer Simpsons you might want to get rid of.
There you go.
You know,
Nailed it.
You know.
Yeah, and I would say that for Exxon, we have different environments that have different needs. You know, our midstream environments and our upstream environments can look a little bit different from our downstream, from a remote access external vendor perspective. In the upstream, heavily relying on external vendors to do a lot of the things that in a chemical refining plant, there's a lot of people sitting in that plant that are doing that work, right? So it's a little, it can even differ internally inside the environment. And so how you layer people, process, and technology can differ a little bit too from one landscape to the other. And what that business is asking for and asking you to do can change. So sometimes it can't be peanut butter spread across the entire organization, but you should be evaluating what the risk is and what needs to be done and what data needs to be pulled out or looked at or interacted with or all those things. And then, you know, hopefully we can get to a point where, you know, the kind of the general access gets to that more granular access down to the specific application, depending on what they are and what they're doing. So hopefully that journey keeps going. So I think all in all, I think those are the type of things we're trying to do is continual improvement, right? It's not going to be solved in one big fell swoop, but just continual improvement, keep churning, keep getting it done. And so I think that's, as long as you're doing that and addressing the risk as it comes along, I think you'll be able to at least, you know, mitigate the risk as much as you can and not be as impacted as possible. I think a lot of these things from an operation perspective, you know, to your point, you know, those are always ongoing. And so who you give access to and what they're doing, it's just a matter of how specific you can get and how much technology and process you can apply to them.
Again, go ahead, Todd, please. I was going to ask if you want to say something.
About remote access. On the first slide, allowing unmanaged devices on an OT network, not something we do. So, in the enterprise, we do have allow personal devices to access some enterprise applications, but, we can be very selective on what applications those are and do require some level of device management to occur, mainly at the application layer, at least in the enterprise. But when you look at remote access in our plants, one of the things we've done is attempted to eliminate VPN, right? So as we moved our service edge from on-premise to the cloud, we had that ability to apply zero trust principles with the offering that we went with to publish applications rather than networks. So the idea that one of our remote staff that needs to get into troubleshooting, first of all, they don't have write access, but their connection is proxied. We're only publishing an application, and the endpoint isn't directly connecting to the backend system. There's a broker that sits between the end user and the device that they're interacting with. With next generation firewall technologies in the middle of that conversation as well, you're able to look for threat actors performing, abnormal commands and those sort of things. But when you talk about the ability to do troubleshooting where, maybe a vendor needs to get in from with some form of write access, we're doing that in an ushered manner. They may have a, hardened endpoint that we publish virtually that requires them to do strong authentication. And then obviously somebody in the plant needs to connect out to that device to let them in and monitors the situation and can disconnect the user. And then making sure, obviously, if there are changes, there's situational awareness there to understand the impact of those changes before they're made.
So if I could ask one question to that, Todd. You said you allow IT world BYOD devices, and they connect into the OT world, and you have firewall rules in place. I've actually worked with companies that allowed the IT world in, had the OT, IT firewalls back-to-back, same ports open, and malware was transferred from the IT side to the OT side with a BYOD device.
Yeah.
120 days that malware sat there. Till finally somebody was going through the audit logs and kept seeing this one process trying to run PowerShell over and over and over again. And the reason that they found it, and it became a concern, was somebody put in a change ticket to allow PowerShell to access that port on the OT side because they said, well, it must need access. They didn't even have the logic thought to think, does this need to get there? Because nobody in the business owner, when they called them up and said, does your application need this? They said, I don't know, I'm not an IT person. If it's asking for it, give it to them. And we caught it with our XDR because of that.
When I talked about personal devices, it was more on the enterprise side. We don't allow personal devices on the corporate network. It's really just to interact with file sharing, email, those sort of things with mobile application management type solutions. But when we do allow our engineers, very selective number of engineers in each of our plants, not only are there, commands, et cetera, that they're executing brokered from a, cloud-based service, there's a, perimeter that's within each zone in the plant, very granular accesses that are there to limit things like file transfer. And then the permissions, both at the operating system layer as well as the application layer, are hardened to prevent any sort of changes occurring. So.
There's a question out there, right? We could talk all day on this. We're all enjoying this, obviously, if you're.
While we're waiting,
So.
I would say that any technology put out there is always going to be only as good as the person who configured it. So, a next generation firewall may be able to do layer 7 firewall rules, but if the person who's allowing that doesn't program it correctly, then it's only as good as the cardboard box that it was delivered in.
Good. Well, I actually kind of wanted to queue up a question along those lines, right? So a lot of good discussion on zero trust, everything else. Purdue model, is it agile and going to move with us? Is it on life support or is it already dead?
You mean ISA 95
Yeah,
and where
there
it's
you
going?
go. Sure.
If I look at our product today, where do we sit? It's a different context everybody would sit to because you have the people that talk the ESP, the PSP, and all these different things. the blurring of 3 to 3.5, even 4.5. And if you've looked at some of the Purdue images, all of a sudden the cloud just miraculously appears as it's part of the Purdue model in some people's drawings. And I'm like, how did the cloud get in there? The problem is that when you look at that model, and it's the traditional OT model, and then you look at the new models that they're coming out with. The new model is a giant circle with spokes out of it. And I actually have people I've worked with that they're using that model and they say, it's great, we can get to everything. Until I showed them that they had their remote people could manage their forklifts on their shop floor because it was connected through this quote unquote industry 4.0 vision. And now the safety comes in. I can override that. I can touch that. You know, smart vehicles. You pull in your driveway and all of a sudden it says, hey, there's an update available. Do you trust the update? Or your car's going to take it automatically. This is where they're pushing the industry to, is the cloud, because they want the real-time data. And I look at a lot of people out there and they say, I don't want to go here. What's the benefit? Because it's more data, but how are they using it? And so I do see the model changing. That's my opinion. But I think you as the experts need to really put a stake in the ground and decide how it changed. You can't let the vendor side determine for you what the best course of action is, no matter what the model.
I think that is perfect what you said right there at the end, because I don't think it's going to die. I hope it doesn't die, to be honest with you. I mean, layered approach is great. I mean, put it in simplistic terms. I mean, having a layered approach and having somebody have to traverse through different layers, you know, hopefully some of the adversaries would get frustrated and tired trying to go through layers. So hopefully that layered approach, it may morph some. It may change some, and it needs to, but I will say, and along the lines of what you just said, I don't think that industry is controlling what the revamping of that layered approach is, and that's a huge mistake.
Yeah.
That will give us issues.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it needs to be a hybrid environment for some time. I mean, at BP, we have, I mean, some of these survey questions were hard, right? Because it says OT systems. So we classify our systems, control, safety, or utility. And based on that, we have different controls and different things you can do, but it's still based on that Purdue model, roughly. But then we have other capability where we want to allow zero trust type capabilities in as well. So I think in a company like ours, we're going to live in a bit of a hybrid environment for some time, where a lot of the controls are still built on those security levels, that tiered model. And some things are going to be more zero trust based. And maybe just to plug the open process automation systems, I think until you can get fully rid of that Purdue model, we need systems that can support zero trust just by the way they're designed, built, and implemented. And until we get there, I think it's going to exist, at least in a hybrid environment, for quite a while.
Yeah. I mean, I think over time we'll see the sort of the castle and moat analogy, you know, dwindle. I know in the enterprise there are several that are, at least when we move to the cloud, looking at things like microsegmentation and securing the identity in the device based on conditions, right? And those conditions always change, right? Constantly validating the health of the identity, the endpoint, et cetera. And so in an OT environment, having, you know, in the future, maybe some of those capabilities, at least at a minimum, each device hardened so they can defend itself. And then, you know, maybe one question for the audience: has somebody figured out how to implement some level of microsegmentation within a control environment rather than, you know, the zoning model that's typically used?
The zoning isn't granular enough, right?
Yeah.
That was going to be one of my questions. Larry, there's another question somewhere?
Oh, you got one over there? Okay, you go and then we'll go.
Okay, so I'm Luciana Seoto from Vale, a mining company, right? I brought some topics here to discuss with you, especially about extending the OT environment to the cloud. I'd like to see how you are dealing with this situation, especially after a dam failure event happened in 2019. We are being requested by national regulatory agents to deploy lots of radars in our industry, right? So this has been a big challenge for us, especially due to the agility, scalability issues that we are facing nowadays. So I'd like to hear from you guys how you are dealing with this challenge and how you see the future of scaling OT environments to the cloud, right?
I mean, if I, hopefully that's not control, moving control to the cloud, but, you know, at least at Dow, you know, a lot of the historian data that we have to exchange with third parties. We're a service provider, in some of the cases in our iPark. So having a secure systems where you can exchange certain information is key, as well as finding ways so that, you know, direct access to the DCS system isn't required by engineers and other teams, right, to be able to get the data they need. So being able to move some of those data components to the cloud, delivering, you know, applications that implement role-based security to only allow them to have access to the plants that they require, and delivering that in an easy, you know, consumable way, right? And so in some cases, we've delivered mobile applications that allow folks to get insight into plants on a regular basis, and those functions are delivered from a cloud-hosted environment, but they're not doing control in the cloud.
And the key is you deploy the applications, right? That's the thing.
Correct.
you
Yeah,
said.
we don't allow in the inbound connection, we push the data from the level 2 network.
Yeah, I would add that it's a little bit of a journey. We have use cases where, to the point of sending data to third parties through our cloud, we do that today. There's also use cases where using some managed cloud services to allow companies like Honeywell to access some of our upstream sites through that, right? I don't know if it's going to be a lift and drop, right? Like I don't think that's ever going to be the case, but I think there are going to be components and functions that move up into the cloud depending on what. But I don't think, as of now, that to the point Todd made of control, right? I mean, that's even though I think there probably is some of that going on out there, I don't think that's as pervasive, and it's very niche, right? So for us, it's been what makes sense and what's risk acceptable. And so I think that's where we are as far as cloud. I don't want to say that we're cloud allergic. We're more cloud aware and cloud, cautious. So that's the way I would say the general ExxonMobil stance is on that.
Yeah, we definitely embrace the cloud at BP, I would say. And we look at it on a case-by-case basis, probably like Exxon. It's going to be a journey to get to the cloud. But I think you're kind of naive to say certain things are never going to happen. And I challenge my team all the time to say, what if we had control anywhere? What would that look like? What would we have to do? Not that we have to do it now, but let's not be naive so we can be prepared. And there's certain assets that we have that are leveraging the cloud. We have SCADA systems in the cloud, right? I mean, you have a centralized control center somewhere. Why can't that be in a cloud data center instead of just some local data center anyway, right? And we started that with some of our onshore wells. A lot of the guys call them sleeping wells. These are the wells that are not high output things that can be shut in anyway. So when we start to do things like that, we look at the security controls, we look at the risk. What is the likelihood of something happening? Well, we don't know enough about how this is going to work, so the likelihood might be up. But the impact for these particular assets is a lot lower, so we could test those things there and then look to move them into other areas.
So you're defining non-real time as opposed to real time, because you said these are sleeping wells and things that have to be right there. If we take the A in availability for OT, how many of you have seen the cloud go down? Okay. The cloud started because people said, let's save some money on an ROI and move everything to the cloud and let everybody else do it. Let George do it. The critical systems that must be up all the time, would you put if you could have a hospital that had all the ICU monitors or CCU monitors, would those go in the cloud, and would you feel comfortable with it? So there is a point of, there's comfort, and then there's, will we ever have comfort? Once again, it's your decision and a business decision of what do you feel comfortable with? Because if availability is key for critical systems, like control centers, and you say, hey, the cloud's going to, I'll be right back in 10 minutes, how does that impact your business? Data to the cloud, as these guys pointed out, is awesome. Because we have vendors out there, we have people right now that come to us and say, I need to get to a ship that's in the middle of nowhere, and all these ships are in a port. I want to collect that data, put it in the cloud, and then bring it forward. It's not real time for them. It's just statistical data. If I have propeller speeds and stuff coming off of that, how critical is that? As opposed to a naval ship, as opposed to your personal boat. So it's all about contextual use case.
Yeah, I think.
You have another question?
I'm just gonna say at BASF, I mean, we put our safety PLC controllers in the cloud to save some money. And we can multi-use,
And here's the password.
and the password is, no.
What is
No,
that?
I think what everybody was saying up here, and
Yeah.
this is what my first thought was when the question was asked, was basically, you know, everything we do, and it's like you said, you can't go out with blinders and say it's something that's never gonna happen, but everything you do, we can't get away from the core of what chemical industry has always been about, and that's risk versus reward. So every application you come across and how you're gonna do it, if you take the time and do some type of risk assessment of it and decide what is meaningful to do and then how to do it in the most or the safest way possible, the securest way possible, is the approach that I think we all have to use. I mean, it's these technologies, these capabilities that can reduce costs are gonna come at us. So you're better if you position yourself to actually look at the risk associated with it, be able to have that in front of people in production and say, here's the risk versus reward of doing this. And this is if we want to do it, then this is the way we want to do it so that we remain secure.
Okay, we have one more question. I think we only have time for one more.
Thank you. Harun Rashid, Phoenix Contact. There are FedRAMP guidelines. Have you looked into those, and how do you find them useful? Have you already gained compliance for FedRAMP in any of your organizations? And just a quick thought. Do you deploy DHS defense in-depth methodologies in your security?
I actually ran the FedRAMP program for Rackspace from their vulnerability and patch management perspective. It's very unique in the fact that how you host it and how you put the environment out there is key. For example, we were infrastructure only. We did not touch databases or applications. We patched and secured their environment. We went and got our FedRAMP authorization. I've done it for 2 companies now. The key component is your sponsorship. Who's going to sponsor to put you in that space? Because you just generally don't spend a couple $100,000 million to get there on your own. And then what's the purpose for it? And you'll see vendors out there that are in the FedRAMP space that have their own enclave or cloud, and people use their services. I haven't seen it much in the utility space. I haven't seen it much in the supply chain manufacturing space. I've seen it predominantly in the vendor space of Splunk and other things out there. I need a service. So for that area, if you've got somebody doing remote monitoring and you need FedRAMP guidelines and you need cameras and other things, that's great. But I haven't really seen people take NERC-CIP or any of the other CFATs or anything and go and say, we're going to do FedRAMP because it's apples and oranges. And now they have the state ramp too, which is coming out. So there's ways to do it, but it's expensive.
I think it was mentioned earlier, right, that compliance is sort of the starting point. It's not the destination. So, you know, at Dow, we periodically for each of our facilities do a joint physical security and cybersecurity assessment, all of which are based on, you know, either NIST cybersecurity framework or the IEC complement of standards to ensure that, you know, best practices are implemented, that our, you know, standard hardening for each of our platforms has been adopted as it's been implemented in each of the plants.
Okay, I think we only have a couple minutes left, so did we want one more question, or there's a question up here? Yes, go ahead. I think we have time for one more. Right here.
Could you do me a favor?
I have lots of questions, but I'll talk to you after.
Hello, this is Ramses Verbrugge. I have a question. We talked about security quite a bit this morning, and I see a lot of it is bottom up, right? But how is the program assisting the end users in doing secure actions? Some examples. Personally, if I look at my email, I get surveys from Dow, from the company I work with. But these are external companies that request me for input. So it forces me to click a button, right? But how do I know the button is authentic? If I do patching, how do I know the image I'm patching is not compromised? You know, things like that. How can we? How do you train your end users in using the infrastructure securely?
Yeah,
Good question.
people are a problem, right? And
Just ask technology.
yeah, we have a whole cyber behaviors team, and part of that team focuses on OT, kind of running workshops, and we have different internal training classes, certifications that people have to go through and complete. Another thing that we just recently started with one of our new assets is operator training simulators, and actually integrating different types of cyber attacks into that to see if they're going to follow different responses and things that they were meant to follow as part of their business continuity plan. But the people journey, the training journey is a big one, and it's one that we don't take lightly, because we really consider the people be the first and last line of defense, and you definitely can't ignore that and just focus on technology solutions.
When I worked at Iberdrola, and I've worked for mail security providers, I'm the Johnny Cash of security. I've been everywhere, literally. But how many of you have companies with an I in your name that if you take a capital I or a small L, it looks exactly the same? And for my campaign to show the people that they were vulnerable, especially operators, I changed the I to an L, registered the cousin domain, sent out an email saying you have to click on this to do this, screen scrape the Iberdrola website, and we had 86% people that clicked on the link. So it's the people.
Things are going to the cloud, right? And things are outsourced to external parties. So it's not that clear anymore what is an authentic source. So even it is indeed the end user that's clicking that button, but in many cases it's an authentic link, right? So the entire landscape becomes very confusing.
We don't have time for enough of that.
Now, let me make a point, though. We do have the next workshop we're having. Well, we have lunch now, and we have this 2-hour break where we'll have the presentations by some of our sponsors. But then the workshop we have at 2:00 is on ransomware and supply chain risks. So that's a perfect question for that. I mean, because that obviously is a very big issue today. How do you trust it? How do you trust? How do you trust it? So anyhow, I want to thank the panel. Please join me.
Thanks.